Welcome, everybody, to My Child, My Voice Parent Connection Show. I'm Wendy Gonzalez-Neal.
And I'm Shea, Mackin.
And today's Thursday, September 24th.
It is.
And we have 40 days until the general presidential election.
Yep, 40 days and counting. Got your counter, your ticker going? Is that what it's called? Countdown? Ticker? I don't know.
Ticker. It's more of a reminder. Have you registered to vote? Are you ready to vote? Have you checked your voter registration to make sure you are registered to vote? Because some of us have been and need to check it. I think it's more of pushing that and reminding people what's going on because it's right around the corner. Next thing you know, boom, we're here.
Yes. Yeah. It was like a month ago. I logged in, double checked. Yes, you're registered to vote. Okay, good. It didn't like expire or whatever. It didn't disappear. They didn't forget about me. So that was good. I was happy. I was like, okay, I don't have to really do anything. But I've been harassing my oldest married child and new daughter-in-law. So she is from out of state. She lived in Utah, which she was, she's a registered voter in Utah, but not here in Texas. And so I'm like, hey, you gotta change that, so that you're registered here.
And how do you do it?
Vote. Yes. And so it's, go to the website. What is the website, Wendy?
It's votetexas.org is a great website. It gives you all the voter. You can check your voter registration. You can check the deadlines. And that's the most important thing because we have until October 5th to register to vote. And then look for early voting. Sorry, I had too much coffee today. Looking for the deadlines because early voting is coming up, especially here in Texas. I know I had to remind my daughter, my youngest, because she got her voter registration card. She goes, so what do I do with it? Do I sign it? Do I need it? So yeah. I think it's a great idea, like for those of us who are registered voters, to teach, even your adult kids, the process, how it works.
Well, and it's so much easier now. You don't even have to do the paper. Like you get the paper, it reminds you in the mail, but then just go online.
But she didn't know what to do with it. That was the question. She's like, so what do I do with this paper? Why do I need it? And so it's like still educating them about that. And then still check out, National Parents Union, Every Family Votes campaign, where you can download our toolkit. And the toolkit will give you so much information on spreading the word, but also, looking for voter information right in your state. And so that's not just for Texas. It's also for any state. Like if you're in Utah or Oklahoma, you can look up that information. And the toolkit is a great way to show you how to spread the word, how to get more people to register to vote. You tell your mamas, your daddies, your tios, your tias, your comadres, you tell them all how to do this with this toolkit. It's very simple, easy, downloadable. It's free because we want to spread that word. Our voice matters, especially families' voices matter.
Yeah. So because it's, in Texas, you've got like a week, y'all. Put a Post-it note on your fridge, put a big poster on your fridge, write it out, put it on your to-do list. And when you've done it, give yourself a star, give yourself an extra scoop of ice cream, whatever you need to do to reward yourself, to remember, go and make sure you register by October 5th in our state. And as we were talking about this, we were like, okay, let's talk to somebody who knows the importance of voting because they ran for a couple different campaigns.
And being that she's a mom, that's so important. We're excited about our guest today, Representative Eastman, who was elected in special election in January 2020 as state representative for Texas House District 148. She also served for the Houston Independent School District Board of Education from 2010 to 2017. She serves on many Houston boards like Breakthrough Houston, Board of Directors, the Woodlands Project, so many of them. And she also has a bachelor's degree in fine arts from Our Lady of Lake. And then, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Her bachelor's degree in fine arts and history from the University of Texas. So yeah, I told you I had too much coffee today.
In Austin, yeah.
In Austin. And a Master of Social Work for Our Lady of the Lake. And, but I think her most important job is she's a mother of 3. So we like to welcome State Representative Anna Eastman. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
I am good. I'm so excited to be here today. I feel like my days, like everyone's right now, kind of blur into, you know, this long miasma of sleep and wake and sometimes never any sleep. But I'm super excited to be here. I was excited to hear the stuff you all were talking about reminding people to register to vote. Before the end of next week, and to make sure your registration's up to date.
Exactly.
You know, that makes a big difference. And I can talk a little bit about that because while we get to vote for, you know, the highest office in the land this fall, there are so many other elections that really matter about what happens to us up close in our day-to-day lives. And where you live really matters about how you impact outcomes of who is going to be serving in those seats. So
yes, and I think what's even more empowering is knowing that you're a mom that did, you know, all of this for not only just your kids but your community. And so we would like to hear a little bit about your empowerment story, like, you know, how and when did you start becoming an empowered mom, you know, in the beginning before joining that school board? How does that, you know, because most parents are doing this. So like, how did you start?
It's interesting. I moved to Houston when my oldest child, I have 3 kids, as you said, and they're now, my oldest has graduated from college, and then I have 2 in college. And when Brad and I moved to Houston in the neighborhood where I still live, it was 22 years ago, and my youngest was barely 2 years old. And we had a teacher that lived across the street from us, and she was one of the first people I met, knocked on my door, and she actually within a few days was asking us for money, like $50, so that they could buy chemistry supplies for the large comprehensive high school where she taught. That was not the school I was zoned to, but the next zone over. And my husband and I, this was in the late 90s, were horrified that she had to ask for money to buy chemistry supplies for the lab and to build a Bunsen burner. And that space is really where I got involved as I started my kind of activism for parents. And we didn't really call it equity back then, but equity in schools and facilities and resources available to kids, because I was shocked. And we got involved in that kind of neighborhood feeder pattern, which I ended up representing for, well, it'll be like 9 years when I'm done with my little mini term on the state, in the state house, which I can tell you all about that later. But it really was just real things that impact people's lives. I couldn't believe that at a Texas public high school, kids weren't being taught chemistry in the way that I remembered at my Texas public high school many, many, many years ago. And other things happened in my neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood in Houston that used to be incredibly socioeconomically diverse. It's becoming less so in our current times, but my husband and I moved here intentionally. We had to fire a real estate agent because we lived on a block that had everything from low-income housing to, you know, surgeon lived on the other end. And we really wanted our kids to grow up in a neighborhood where there were people that weren't just like us. And several things happened around schools, or maybe kids being moved from one neighborhood to another during construction of our new school and the parents not being happy about it. And you know, you sent me some written questions and it was like, when did you become an empowered parent? And I think that whenever I've seen something that doesn't seem right or just, like I couldn't help and I was lucky enough that there was never anything at risk for me. If I spoke up, if I complained, or even I called my friend out in public, like I never had anything that was at risk for my kids or in my livelihood. And so I've always been someone to speak up or talk about something if it doesn't feel or appear to be right, and then start digging behind whatever that surfacey stuff is to try to solve problems. And so it was really before my kids were ever in school, and then just became increasingly so as I saw the kind of public school journey for a family here in Houston as part of my real life.
Right. And is that what got you to say, okay, I'm going to be on the Houston Independent School Board?
Well, it's a long journey from like that first thing to there. I became involved in my school PTA. I ended up being the PTA president because it's one of those jobs that nobody wants to do.
Right.
And I think my mindset was like, how can I sit here and complain about the people doing the work if I'm not willing to try to do it myself? Because I think that's a very common scenario, not only in PTAs, but in a lot of pockets of our life. You know, somebody takes the risk and steps forward and says, well, I'll do it. And a lot of other people feel comfortable criticizing or saying, why would they do that, without having had the perspective of being in the role. And so, you know, I could say I ran for PTA president, but I think it would be more appropriate to say I volunteered, because there was never anyone who was actually going to run against you.
I think that's every school.
PTA always ends up that way. And so I became friends with the woman who was sitting on the school board at the time, and she was a mom. Like, her campaign slogan was "One Smart Mommy," and I was a stay-at-home mom. I had the luxury of being able to stay at home with my kids, but I always felt like there was something missing, and I wanted to be doing more. And she started toying with the idea of not running again, and we had multiple conversations where she would ask me, do you know of anyone who would do this? And about the fourth time she asked me that question, I said, are you trying to imply that I might be able to do it? And she says, well, what do you think? And I started laughing, and I said, I haven't ever even been to a school board meeting. You know, my focus has always been either my school or the sister school. We had done something where we had a convening of all the PTAs, not PTOs, PTAs in our little pocket, our feeder pattern, so that the schools that had much more established leadership could work together with the schools that were kind of struggling around that framework. So, you know, I had stayed in my own backyard, and I kind of put that to bed, left for summer, came home from a family trip, and there was an email in my inbox that said, we're all meeting at Christine's house to try to find someone to run to fill Natasha's seat because she's not running. And I went to the meeting in cutoffs, no makeup, and sat on the floor in the corner, and people said, are you going to do it? And I was like, no. And then I listened to everyone talking, and I felt like, you know, if I don't try this, I'm really going to regret it. And so I kind of raised my hand in the back of the room and said, I might do it, but I've got to talk to my people at home and see if this is something they want to go in on. And so we all had to come back the next week, and there were 4 people who said they were interested. And the next Monday, only 2 of us showed up. 2 of the 4 showed up, and the other woman was dressed professionally, and she had a folder with a speech in it. And I didn't have cutoffs on that day, but I was still pretty casual. I'd been with my kids all day outside in the yard, you know, and I said, why don't you go first? I you look like you're really prepared. And then I gave a little speech from the heart, and we did a straw poll where people wrote down one of our names on a piece of paper, and the woman whose house where we were went back and counted the votes, and I won. That was my first election I had ever won. And I was the candidate, and I literally, like, I'm not proud of this, but I had not been to a school board meeting. I was charged with raising $85,000. That was how much it was going to cost to run a competitive campaign against the two other women who had already filed. And I proceeded to have, a sweaty panic attack that lasted until December 11th when I won. And I learned so much about facing fear, about feeling incredibly vulnerable. It is if you ever run for office, a public office where on election day it's going to be on the TV how many people voted for you, you know how much vulnerability that creates. And so I have a ton of respect for anyone who puts their name in the ring for that. And I learned a lot during that time about public education policy, about who the beneficiary of the system should be, and who the beneficiary of the system is. And I believe deeply that it should be children. And I've seen on far too many occasions that unfortunately it's everyone but children. And we don't do a great job with making sure teachers, who are the most important lever in that system, being rewarded professionally and financially the way they should be. And as a result, a lot of other interests end up getting in the way. That was a long, hairy dog answer to that. I didn't really understand all that. I had no idea. I thought people who ran for school board were like me, and I worked with some wonderful people on the school board. And we brought a lot of different ideas to the table. And I had the great benefit of doing it for many years with people who didn't agree on everything. We did agree on the what, we didn't agree on the how.
Right.
But anyway, that's...
Well, Representative Eastman, I have to admire you. I was one of those moms that, went to the school board, and that's actually how I met you, was hearing you there, fighting for your community, fighting for the kids. And that was one thing that I admired about you and then bringing the resources to the community, always thinking of the community first. So from being this mom that started in a PTA and then went to a school board, I know that was very tough and scary. But a lot of parents don't understand, like, these school board are local elections. And how did you, talk to everyday parents like me and Shea to say this is an important, election?
Well, I went to school meetings, back to school meetings. I knocked on countless doors. I have one memory that it was seared into the fabric of me now. I met a teacher block walking in my neighborhood, and he taught at a middle school in my district, but it was in the far northeast portion of my district. And it was a dual language Vanguard, which is the gifted and talented middle school, probably 98% low income Hispanic. And he invited me to come to their back to school night. And I went, and I had copied a letter I had handed out to people, and I had it translated into Spanish, and I probably brought 50 copies of the letter. And I got there, and there must have been 1,000 people in the cafetorium space, and they had dinner, and they had all kinds of activities going on, and the meeting was held in Spanish. And I am not a fluent Spanish speaker. I have very I would say I have like child Spanish. And they introduced me and said, would you like a translator? And I was like, no, I'm gonna do it myself. And I proceeded to speak in Spanish to this large room of people. And I said, I think people understood me because the translators didn't correct what I said. I'm sure my grammar was really bad, but I said, if I expect for you all to trust that when you can come to me with whatever issues it is or whatever things you want to have happen at your school, I have to be willing to speak to you in your language as best as possible. I have to be able to take that risk here in this room too. And it was one of these, because everybody was watching me. Like, I'll never forget when they handed me the microphone. They're like, and I will tell you that I heard people reached out to me directly throughout my time on the board. Now, there's a lot of people that would never believe that happened because I was a convenient target, because I live in the more affluent part of my board member district, and I'm a white woman. And so there was always suspicion that I was in it for me and my friends and not in it for everyone. And that was not my experience. I sat in many, many meetings and had people call me with all kinds of issues, from, a nonverbal Down syndrome child coming home with bruises to parents. There was a rezoning fight on the board one year, and they were going to redraw school zones in the lowest income part of my board member district. And I sat in multiple meetings with parents who said, absolutely not. And they had the exact same script, language, wants, awareness as the parents on the far west side of my district who were affluent, and I put my foot down and said, absolutely not. We will do the work to make the school desirable to these parents, but we will not force them to send their kids there until that work is done. And I ended up bringing my colleagues along, and we won that vote. And it really was about amplifying the voice of parents who wanted the same thing I want for my kids, and the same thing everybody that was sitting at that table with me wanted for their kids. And so, that's a real example of parents organizing. And it would have been easy just to kind of not listen and go along to be more popular in my pond of 9 that had to vote on this stuff.
So I was just curious to know, as you're talking to these parents, and some who are not familiar with these local school board elections, how did you, a lot of times, like for me, when I was going, I would try to bring parents to come to it. It makes a difference. How did you speak to them to say your vote makes a difference because it affects your child's education?
Gosh, I hate to say it, but I might have not done a great job. But I think just having the interaction about a real issue for them that was going to maybe change the trajectory of their child's life brought value to that. It mattered someone was there that was going to listen and work on their behalf. And I will tell you that I ran twice for the school board. And the first time I barely won by 189 votes. And I had an opponent the second time, and I won with almost 70% of the vote. And so for me, that was an affirmation that even those people heard that and knew that it mattered to participate in elections. And that school board, and it's going to be very interesting in this election cycle, because in Texas, we no longer have straight ticket voting. And school board is a municipal, nonpartisan position. And it is going to require people to go through not only the president, the Senate race, the state Senate races, the state representative races, all the county races to get to the bottom for school board. And, you know, I would argue that school board is one of the most impactful elected positions in our world. I mean, we set tax rates. We decide on how that money is going to be spent. And if you're a homeowner, you see the tax bill that you get, and you see that's the largest line item, the largest bucket, single bucket on your tax bill. And even if you're a renter, those things impact how much you pay for your rent. And then they end up impacting what happens at your school. Not just what school buildings look like, but they impact what happens inside the classrooms, whether or not they're new and fancy or they're old and run down. You know?
Well, and right now the school boards are the ones deciding if you're distance learning, you know, hybrid, if you file for the next 4-week extension to be able to do distance learning, or no, we're in the classroom. That is the school board making that decision. I'm always curious, as when I'm trying to figure out who do I vote for with a school board, how do I figure out who is out in the community talking to not just people that look like me?
Right.
As a you know, as a white girl.
Right.
But I have siblings of color, and I want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. So if they're not, how do I know that the person I'm voting for is out there in the community making sure they're listening to everyone? If that makes sense.
Well, first of all, I think, you know, that you can look at and follow people on social media and those kind of things and see what they're up to, what you hear from them in their district, and you can reach out directly to the person. Or usually school board campaigns don't have a huge team of people. It's probably the candidate and then, you know, a manager and maybe a consultant. The other thing is invite them into your community. I mean, a lot of times people who are running for office, they do have good connections, and sometimes they don't, you know, and people will have events, and now we can do it online. And I would say on some levels, it may be easier to reach people in conversations doing it in an online forum. You don't have to get in your car and leave your kids and go out to a meeting. This is all remains to be seen.
Right.
But I think it's a great advantage for both candidates and for voters to say, look, we want to hear from you. We want to ask you real questions. We want to know who is funding your campaign. The rules around campaign funding are really fast and loose. And that information, it's kind of hard to find, but it's available to know. Are they being funded by people who get paid to build schools and mow lawns and make fences or sell curtains for auditoriums? Or are they being funded by their friends and other people in their community? And there's real simple ways to look at that. I mean, you're probably going to have a handful of people that give you large contributions to be able to have enough money. But then if you match that amount with 150, 200 other smaller donations, those kind of things can tell you that you have a broader base. And also people post now on social media things, people post their calendar where they're going to be. And, you know, that's one way to kind of check. But I also think inviting or just asking, you know, who are the movers and shakers in this part of the district that you engage with or know. And if somebody doesn't have any names or anything like that, you know, that's going to want to be a question for you.
And I think my next thing is, I know when, you know, my kids, especially my youngest, being in a different type of school than my oldest kids, we hosted a lot of town halls for elected officials that were who were in their district. Right. I think my question to you is, there are a lot of the younger generation who doesn't know the importance of voting and why and so forth. How would you, as an elected official, approach a high school student or even a college student to tell them about the importance of this?
I think there's a mixture of kind of newfangled ways of touching people, you know, like I said, through social media, but also being present. I mean, you cannot campaign on a school campus. You can tell people who you are and that you're running, but you can't pass out campaign literature or things like that. And there are a lot of events that are held for young people that you can show up at and be present. And I think also, you know, talking to young people who, you know, it may not be their concern if they're in between, you know, they're leaving high school, but they also know, you know, the things that they got and they didn't get at while they were in school. And I think asking them about that and engaging them and having conversations, I found that a lot of young people I met with, a couple of times I spoke at a professor's class at HCC Northline, and you know, these were kids who had gone on to the next step. They had stayed in town because it was all that was accessible to them. And they were pissed because it turned out they thought they were being taught math, but they weren't. And they had to go back and take a remedial course. And kind of tapping into that and saying, you know, it matters who sits in these seats. And school board is not like this exciting, you know, sexy thing to do that everyone follows. Well, they don't follow when it's working. They do follow it when it's not working. But but really having a conversation around, you know, the board members decide whether or not your school has a good selection of high-level classes like AP classes. And they also decide whether or not it matters if you're taught the subject matter that's going to help you do better on the test at the end of that course. And nobody likes to talk about testing. I mean, testing is like the big bad boogeyman, but I've also sat in a fishbowl conversation with a bunch of kids who said, you know, I got an A in that class. And when I sat down to take the test and I opened the booklet up, there was stuff in there I had never seen. It might have been written in a foreign language. And so, you know, that was one of the things when I was on the board that was really important. Like, it mattered to look at the grades kids were being given as compared to how they did on those exams. Now, they may not get the highest score possible, but if you're getting an A, you should be in a range where you would get credit for what you were taught and what you learned. And so I think having conversations with kids about those real tactile things that they experienced when they were in school, and pointing out that these people make those decisions for how much of the resources are going to be sent to the school level, and how much control is the school going to have over how they're spent. And then is anyone checking to see whether or not that mattered for them, for the kids? I've told a couple people before who want to do these like education PSAs. And I'm like, you need to go find a bunch of kids that are at HCC or UHD or working a part-time job, and ask them what they thought their diploma was going to mean and then what it did after they got out, and tell that story. Like, and everybody's like, oh, that sounds really depressing. And I said, well, it shouldn't be, but if it is, we need to tell it, and we need to talk about why that is. Because you know, last time I checked, I don't care what elementary school you go to and what part of town, you ask the parents what they want for their kids, it's probably going to be pretty much the same stuff. You know, they want them to graduate on time. And most people want their kids to have access to education after 12th grade, you know.
Right.
I would say college, but it's not going to be for everybody. But I don't
But
think
it could be
that's
technical school. It could be.
yeah. I mean, I think that's who's going to fight for kids not going to college? Like, what's that about? You know, last time I checked, that's, you know, who's going to make that decision about the system shouldn't make that the decision of who gets to go and who doesn't. And if we don't give the kids the tools they need, then we are making that decision for them.
Yeah. So being both on the school board and then, you know, in the House, how do you see elected officials communicating with people that are non-English speakers?
I don't think it's done well. My chief of staff is bilingual. She is a Mexican immigrant who is, she's now a U.S. citizen. She was a dreamer and a DACA recipient. And so she has walked it and she speaks the language and she even helps me see places where I don't always notice that it's not available. And we have translated many, many things since being in the House ourselves because it's not available in Spanish, or we request that it's put in Spanish. I mean, shocking stuff. There was a program that was part of the CARES Act, pandemic EBT, where parents could get the money schools would have spent on their lunch and breakfast transferred either to their own SNAP cards, or they got a credit card that was pre-filled. And that stuff originally wasn't available in Spanish. I mean, that was just shocking, you know? Yeah. And we just created this list of things your state legislator can do for you, which a lot of people are not aware, that if you have trouble with an unemployment claim, if you are having trouble with an issue with CPS, if you're having, I mean, there is a list. If you're having trouble getting your surgery covered by your insurance, there's an ombudsman that we can put you in touch with. And we created this list of things that we can do for you. And we got it in Spanish and English. And we had to get permission to distribute it because it was like, yeah, we do all this stuff, but do we want to put it on blast? Because then people are going to.
Then they're going to want it.
People are like, yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And it is, I know there's another guy who's running for re-election and he served his first term last time. And one of the things I remember talking to him about early on is he had no idea when he stepped into his office, the real meaty everyday problems that he could help people solve. And a lot of it's because our agencies are overloaded and underfunded and their systems are, you know, antiquated. And so it really stinks that someone has to find and get in touch with their elected official to expedite that stuff. But people, your representatives are there to help you with that stuff. I'm here to tell you, do not be afraid to reach out to us. We are just regular people.
Right.
We are regular people. Nobody gets a crash course or a long master's degree in how to do this work. And it's our job to serve you, you know, and that's the same for a school board trustee. A lot of times, I mean, yes, you go to your teacher first, or yes, you go to your principal first, but if nobody's listening, the school board trustee is the placeholder for the people. I'm not there for Anna Eastman. I wasn't there for Anna Eastman. I wasn't there to get experience, to go on to the next thing. I was there to be a voice for the people in this giant system that, you know, everybody has different allegiances to. And that's also why it's really important for parents to run for these positions. It's very important for there to be a voice for parents and children at the table, because there's voices for just about everybody else. But it's really important. And it's also important if one of your friends steps into the fray and decides to take a risk, to support them. And if you're a mommy and you got little kids, you're going to need somebody to pick your kids up sometimes. And it really mattered when I was pushing something that I believed was important, that other people showed up. My voice was 10 times stronger and more effective if I had the Wendy's in the room watching, you know. I mean, if I got scared of my other people, knowing that there were people out there with me, it made my voice that much stronger. But it also made my colleagues listen if there were people there that were invested. And I would say it was rare that the board went against the public if there was a large public presence involved in the conversation. And that's the same with state legislators. Our offices are open during session. You should call and make an appointment. But my mother-in-law is a breast cancer activist, grassroots, and she and her friends have gotten all kinds of laws passed over the years because they go up and they sit in people's offices, they call, they make relationships with the chiefs of staff. You do not have to be these people's peers or their buddies. They just got to know if they go to the grocery store, they might see you. And there's a lot of issues that come across our tables. And if we're hearing from the people that live in our districts, I think I'm incentivized to learn more about the issue and be a part of working with the people who make the laws to get stuff done. So
that is so true. I mean, a lot of parents feel, you know, scared to go up, like you were mentioning. Elected officials are everyday people, their parents or grandparents, you know, and a lot of them, especially like in the communities here in Houston, there's a lot of undocumented, non-English speakers. And a lot of them are like, well, I can't vote, but how do I teach my kid about the importance of voting?
Right.
I think asking you as a mom, because you have your kids and you were going through all of this, what is the tips that you would give, you know, parents?
You know, well, the first thing I was going to say, well, I take my kids to vote with me, but if you can't vote, you're not able to do that. But I think having that conversation about, you know, you're here, this is where you're building your life, the decisions they're making, and especially for kids who have undocumented parents. I mean, just having a conversation about what's happened since coronavirus and the CARES Act, and knowing that if you have one parent who's a citizen and you have children who are citizens, but you're married to someone who's undocumented, you didn't get any of the benefits. I mean, that was a horrible travesty in my opinion. And I know our elected leaders fought very hard to change that. And I believe it may have been changed in the second round of funds that were given out. But I think, you know, sometimes we don't want our kids to see how hard we work or what our worries are. But I think being honest in an appropriate way about that and the things that, if they're in place, can make your life a little bit easier or give you the ability to be a little more fulfilled or access your dreams, and encouraging them to take that time to go and vote. You know, I saw a lot of young people that came to the polls, and they, you know, I would also, if you have a relationship with a teacher, to push kids to do it. People come and vote in school buildings. I mean, we're not in school buildings right now. I have this daily thing where you know, I forget that we're not doing this stuff anymore. I realize I haven't done it for many, many months. I think those things are going to come back. And I think finding a news source that you digest in an appropriate amount of time. I'm actually, I believe it's healthy to be very intentional about how much news we consume. And I think that's listening to things that we agree with and things that we don't agree with, to challenge ourselves, but also, you know, not just keeping kind of the negative, scary on loop, but instead, you know, and finding people to highlight. I think about Senator Carol Alvarado spends so much time in her community. I mean, I watched her while I was campaigning, and it was after her first session as senator, and she was at every single meeting that I was at. And then senators have very large districts, and she was out telling people the votes, the bills that she worked on that got passed, other bills that got passed, explaining HB3, the massive education bill that they got passed, explaining that they got passed a bill that required insurance companies to pay for diagnostic mammograms, you know, because in the past you only got your insurance would only pay for your routine mammogram, but if there was something wrong and you had to get another one, for whatever reason, that wasn't covered by insurance, you know. And not only was she able, but she spent the time going into her community, sharing with people the work that they had done and how it was going to impact their lives. And, you know, I would also say that if your elected official is dismissive of you, that, you know, that's time to go back, ask again, don't write them off. But they work for us. We work for you. And so people can make time to meet with their constituents. It shouldn't be a huge battle to make it happen. And if people aren't willing to make that time, that should be a question mark. And you can work to get somebody else to run for the position, or you can do it yourself. And so I think really encouraging your kids to engage at school and in their education. And then when you see an opportunity for them to plug in or participate in some kind of civic thing, encourage them to go. I know there's a lot of fear around what it's like to be here right now and be undocumented. But I do think it's incredibly important to get your kids to vote, to participate in the census. I think we only have a few more days that you can do that. And I know there was a lot of fear that churned around that, but that is going to affect how much money we get for all kinds of public services, and it's going to affect how our districts are drawn and who we elect going forward, and who are going to be making really big decisions, from whether or not you're learning in a school building and what kind of protections are there. You know, school's going to be a life, you know, there's a lot of other risks that come within going into a school building now. And so just talking to your kids about who is elected and who's making decisions affects whether or not you can, you know, everything from whether or not you can lay down at night and go to sleep easy, and what kind of jobs you can access, and then whether or not you can go to the doctor when you feel bad. So
the legislative session, you know, because in Texas we only do this every other year.
Right.
And with COVID and with, everything kind of going on right now, do you, in your position, kind of have a sense of what maybe some of the focus will be this legislative session?
Well, I think the budget is going to be the two major issues for the Texas legislature. I mean, the budget is always the biggest issue. The budget is really the only thing you are required to pass a balanced budget is like the thing that you're required to do. And we're going to have a really hard budget season, not only with how COVID has impacted the economy, but with the energy crisis and the oil glut. We had forecast that we were going to have a surplus and we are going to have a big deficit. And so I know that education is something that both sides of the aisle, I believe, want to keep intact. They made one of the biggest investments in public education that they've made in decades last session. And that was already going to be a big focus of this session because they only funded it for the biennium. They didn't fund it in perpetuity. So they were going to have to identify those dollars. Medicaid expansion. And I think, so basically, when the Affordable Health Care Act was passed, there was a huge Medicaid expansion thing, but states had to opt into it. And Texas is one of only, I believe, 14 or maybe 13 states now that has not opted into it. We send federal tax dollars to Washington, D.C. that we don't get back, and it creates a huge gap in the working poor insurability. And we have, hundreds of thousands of people who are not insured that are working. And so they make too much money to receive Medicaid, and they don't make enough money to be able to afford a traditional insurance policy. And I think especially in light of COVID-19 and when we look at who's died in Texas, I mean, it's just ridiculously overrepresented Latinos. And it's because people don't have access to doctors. They don't have confidence that if they go to the doctor that they're not somehow going to be identified or their family member's going to be identified and then be at risk for deportation. And so I hope that they address Medicaid expansion on day one. And I hope that Republicans come along. It's hurting all of us economically and real life issues. And then, just the budget overall and where they're going to decide to make cuts it's going to require some really tough decisions. And then redistricting is the other major issue. And it is going to be, I think, a contentious thing. If we do flip the House, meaning we have a Democratic majority in the House, it's going to require a lot of working across the aisle to come up with a plan that everybody can get behind. And hopefully, if we don't flip the House, we still have a fair process and we don't end up even further gerrymandered. So all the voters, or we reduce, I hope we reduce gerrymandering so all voters actually have a better say in who represents them. And it's not crafted in such a way that it makes it impossible for there to be diverse representation in our government.
But real quick before we end, what you were talking about redistricting, I think some of our parents might go, well, why is that important? Why do we need to change the districts around?
So every 10 years when we do the census, we have to redraw or tweak our electoral districts. And so that's everything from school board districts to state house districts, state senate districts. The state also decides on congressional representation, and with a robust census count, we could gain, I think, 3 congresspersons in Texas. And so because population shifts and demographics shift, it's very important to know who lives where so that you draw districts that allow for diverse representation, and both across parties and ideologies, and then across ethnicity, so that and districts can be drawn in a manipulative way that makes it almost impossible to elect a Democrat in what someone wants to be a Republican seat. And they shift. Like this district 148 and the board member district has changed drastically. And it's not just kind of the core Heights part, but even as you push out, there's a lot of gentrification.
Right.
And so, you know, some of those lines maybe need to be moved a little bit to make sure that it becomes impossible to elect a person of color in this district, or it becomes impossible to flip a seat somewhere where there's a lot of change. I mean, in my district, there are big parts of it where not a lot of people vote. And that's another thing to look at in your representation, because you know, I may have certain parts of my district where more people vote. And one of the reasons why I think I lost my primary is because I took a controversial position in a place where I had always gotten a lot of votes. And the controversial position was that I vocally supported a low-income housing development in an upper-income part in my neighborhood, actually. And we don't have time to go into what the state rep's role is in that, but I could have taken a more politically expedient route, and I didn't. And I did what I did before COVID-19 and the economy crashed, but as it became more and more heated, and it became clear that people were going to be struggling to, you know, maintain their housing and not get evicted from their apartments.
Right.
It became more critical that we support these kind of developments throughout the district. And so electing people, that look like you is important, but also electing someone that's willing to stand up to their neighbors that look like them and say, no, y'all may not want this here, but it's important. And once it's here, you're going to be over it, is another thing. And so redistricting is going to be very important. I don't know if things stay the same and we don't change a lot of seats. I don't know how different it will look, other than they might make it even harder for the makeup of our elected bodies to change in the near future. You know, we've got some really big things that are going to be decided really quickly. And so who gets elected going forward is going to matter. I was listening to something, I don't know how much more time I think we're supposed to be done, but you know, if a Supreme Court justice gets appointed really quickly, who gets elected in your state is going to matter, because you're going to be able to make decisions up close and in your state that are going to impact you that the Supreme Court isn't going to protect anymore, you know? So that's why that stuff is important, and that's why it's important to vote.
So that's all great advice. I think really quick is, how does a parent follow all of this? Because I know a lot of times it's hard, like you were mentioning, it's hard to find things. Where can a parent follow this, an everyday parent like us that can follow, like you were saying, redistricting? If we caught the attention of parents about redistricting, like, oh, wait a minute, I need to follow this. Where can they go?
So there are all kinds of hearings that happen during redistricting too. And I know that they're required to put announcements in just your regular newspaper. It's hard to have access to the newspaper if you're not subscribing to it. But that is a place to go. There's a bunch of other community newspapers that are out there that you can get for free. I know in my area, we have The Leader. There's a new thing in Houston called Community Impact that I've found to be actually pretty informative. People, when I first got it, I was like, what is this? And they seem to be pretty straight up and give good information. You know, I find things like Twitter completely overwhelming, but there's a ton of good information on there, and most of us have phones where we can access those platforms, and I think all kinds of social media channels. I mean, people are even using Instagram to put out that kind of information now.
Right.
And I don't, like I said, I don't watch the evening news, but you can pull up little clips and watch it there. I think at your, I don't know if people are even going to like libraries and stuff right now to get information, but those are also places, especially if you have kids and you need access to books and stuff, there's all that information is available for adults there.
Thank you so much, Rod. This has been such informative. I mean, it was eye-opening and great.
So. I could talk about all this stuff for hours and hours and hours.
Yes, and I mean, this is why I love talking to you, because you're always giving great information out for the communities, and not just your own community. You're always talking about Houston in general. So I want to thank you, Representative Eastman, for being our guest today, sharing your stories, encouraging everyone to vote. And we want to tell everybody out there, make a pledge to vote out there, you know, to have your voices heard this election. So tell your friends, tell your tias, your tios, your mamas, your daddies, you know, your comadres, you know, make sure to have, our voices are very powerful if we all vote together.
Thank you guys for doing this.
Oh, no, thank you.
Fabulous. Yeah.
We would love to have you come back and talk some more. I know we can talk all day.
You reach out anytime and I'll be honest when I can come and when I can't. So, and I would love to bring someone else on, you know, some other people on.
Yes, please.
Bring my chief of staff on with me next time, Marisol, because she can help too with all kinds of insights that, you know, not any one of us can be aware of.
Yeah, I got the pleasure to meet her, and yes, I would love to have her come on the show and talk more. And yeah, send any other guests that you think would be important for our parents to meet and know about some great information, not just in the Houston area either, or in Texas.
Yep.
This is great. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.